G'day everyone, welcome to the Creation Talk podcast, and this time we're going to talk about natural selection and how natural selection is a real phenomenon, but it is not evolution. Now, my name is Dr. Jonathan Sarfati. I'm a scientist, speaker, and writer with Creation Ministries now in the USA, and with me is...
I'm Robert Carter. I am also a PhD in science, and I'm a speaker for Creation Ministries International. In fact, Jonathan and I share an office.
Now, natural selection is commonly called survival of the fittest, but this actually misses the point, doesn't it?
Bad term. Total bad term, because you have to define what fittest means, and plus it's not about survival. It's about reproduction.
It is. I mean, Dobzhansky said natural selection should be defined as differential reproduction.
Yeah, survival of the fittest, natural selection. These are terms that Darwin and his contemporaries wrestled with because it's really hard to come up with a catchphrase that succinctly answers what it's all about. And so survival of the fittest came up. And all of Darwin's examples that he uses is about death. It's all about survival. You know, if you have this many offspring, this many die. But he's actually flipped the answer over. He flipped the argument over. It's about reproduction. It's he who dies with the most offspring wins.
So we could really call it reproduction of the fittest. That would be an accurate
that would be
term.
much better. Yeah. And there's different ways to do it. I mean, oak trees, they might wait 80 years before they start producing acorns. And yet bacteria reproduce every 20 minutes.
So it's a case of how many surviving offspring there are that can actually pass on their genes to the following generation. I mean, humans, we do it pretty slowly, but it seems to be reasonably successful. Rabbits do it really quickly, but a lot of them die.
Yeah, a lot of them get eaten very quickly. So there's different strategies that different living things that God created have. Some produce lots of offspring with the expectation that not many of them will live, and some produce only a few offspring and protect them very carefully to make sure that they can live.
Yeah, so I guess when we understand natural selection as reproduction, that some things will reproduce more than others. I mean, if A is fitter than B, then by definition, A is leaving more surviving offspring than B. This is a fact. This actually happens. You can't dispute that this is a factual thing. It's a phenomenon that's observable.
And over time, if A is producing more than B, there's going to be more genes for A. So the population is going to change over time because one type is having more offspring than the other. I mean, this is not anti-Bible. It's not anti-science. It's actually quite common sense.
Well, you wrote an article not that long ago about how natural selection would have occurred before the fall even, because if it is reproduction of the fittest, there'd be a role for natural selection before the fall happens.
Yeah, I called it natural selection in paradise. I mean, imagine that you have a bacterium living in soil. And let's say that over time, there are trees that are growing and the soil turns into a forest. Okay, fine. Well, the bacteria have to change. They're in a totally different environment now. And so given whatever abilities those bacterium have in the beginning, now the environment changes, some of them are going to reproduce better in the new environment. And the genetics is going to change just because of reproduction. There's no death involved here. There's no struggle. There's no survival. It's just reproduction of really simple things to overcome a new type of environment. Even in paradise before the fall, it doesn't mean that everything is absolutely stagnant. Environments will still change. You're still going to have river deltas growing. You're still going to have marshes filling in over time. So it's not like you can just have a completely static world. It's not the way it would work because physics and reality still apply to the world before the fall.
And Adam and Eve were meant to work even before the fall, so that would involve changing the environment, and some things would be able to do better in that environment than the other, and it wouldn't have to involve any death. But I guess plant death before the fall isn't a problem because death before the fall refers to the nefesh chaya, which is the vertebrate animals, not the plants or the bacteria, so it wouldn't be a problem necessarily anyway.
Imagine that Adam and Eve's descendants stumble upon a beautiful valley and they say, hey, we're going to turn this valley into farmland. They're going to absolutely change the environment. They're going to change the species that are living there. They're going to change the amount of water that's percolating through the soil. I mean, all these different things will change. They'll change the chemistry of it. And therefore, whatever's living in the soil will change. And differential reproduction, survival of the most reproducing bacteria and insects and worms these things are going to readapt to a new environment. It's kind
So
of
I guess
easy
you
to
can even
comprehend, isn't
I
it?
know. I mean, I can imagine even Adam, when he tends the fruit trees in the garden, might want to breed some trees that he likes better than others. That'd be a perfectly good thing to do.
Yeah, and if you start changing the type of tree, you might start changing the type of birds that come in because they like a different type of branching pattern or something like that. You'll change the amount of shade in the ground, which will change the amount of grass and the types of grasses that will grow. This is all part of the natural world. It's part of the God-created world. That as things reproduce, you're gonna have changes in the genes in those populations.
And therefore, you could get new varieties and things from the original created kinds with lots of genetic variation.
Yeah.
I could imagine lots of different varieties could be generated before the fall, even.
Yeah, naturally, without human intervention, even. Because I mean, imagine that God front loads some created organism with a lot of genetic diversity, and it's all kind of mixed together. But then eventually, one organism pops out, has two copies of like a gene that gives it white fur. Well, all of a sudden, that animal's like, hey, you know what? I can go live on snow and no one can see me. So you can have different things popping up in a population based on what God originally put into that population. And then if that gives that organism an advantage, maybe it can fly higher or maybe it can swim faster. It's funny because what we can do here is we can take Darwin's best argument and steal it for ourselves. Say, thank you, Mr. Darwin. That's ours. Go play with something else. You've got nothing to say here.
Exactly. I mean, especially when, in fact, creationists understood natural selection to be a real process before Darwin thought of it. Darwin tried to hijack it to be a creative force, but creationists understood this before Darwin, and it's really quite strange. We see supposed proofs of evolution, which are really proofs of natural selection, which informed creationists accept anyway.
Yeah. And so we don't have to have this knee-jerk response, natural selection equals evolution, therefore natural selection can't be true. That's not right. You're actually, throwing a baby out with the bathwater, trying to get my metaphor correct here. You don't want to throw the baby out with the bathwater. You can take the baby up and throw away the dirty bathwater and you have a beautiful baby.
Yeah, because Darwin, who contaminated the bath first,
yes, he did.
The bath filled by creationists. So why should we throw out something which was a creationist invention anyway?
Yeah. And the whole idea of change over time, that's not contrary to Scripture. The Bible does not say that God created all species as they are today. Aristotle said that. So Darwin was actually arguing against a Greek philosophy, calling it a biblical philosophy, and the Bible doesn't say that at all. In fact, there's a classic example of change over time right there in Genesis when Jacob deliberately breeds sheep and changes the coat color of his flocks within just a few generations. Now, of course, this is artificial selection, but artificial selection is often used as a parallel to natural selection. So even in the Bible, we can see the species can change based on the original stuff that God gave them, and plus maybe some mutations that occur over time.
Well, and also we know that sheep and goats can interbreed, but even in biblical times, sheep and goats were regarded were separate, even though they're the same created kind. So we've got an example in the Bible of fairly rapid variation within the kind.
Really interesting article in Journal of Creation. I think it was by Gene Leitner, about the sheep and the goats. And there's a really cool table in there on sheep and goats and the different species or different subtypes. And sometimes you can get sheep and goats that can interbreed. Really cool. And then she pointed out in the Bible, there's a word for sheep and there's a word for goat and there's a word for sheep or goat. So at Passover, you could bring a sheep or a goat as your sacrifice. Oh, because they understood that there was some like ambiguous dividing line between these two things as if they started off as the same created kind. And then farmers separated them into the sheep-like things and the goat-like things.
You can imagine Adam and Eve doing this before the fall.
Yeah, I can imagine all sorts of farming technologies, the rise of new crops and new animals as farmers select things, because that's what farmers naturally do. Man, that heifer is really big. Let's breed her because we're going to get more big cows, more milk. Even if they weren't eating the meat from the cow, they could still have been drinking the milk or using it to plow because a stronger cow, now we can plow more fields with it. I mean, artificial selection would happen automatically as soon as you add humans to the picture.
Yeah, can't escape it.
No, we cannot.
Like I said, the fall has actually spoiled a few things, and now natural selection often is eliminative.
Yeah.
as opposed to, and that's how the unfit are removed from the genome because they're actually killed. That actually happens today. We can't escape that. It is happening.
There's this idea in a lot of creationist circles that God pre-programmed life to fill the environments that he created. And that is true, absolutely true. But once the fall happens, we introduce something that wasn't in the original creation, that is struggle and death. And now we have natural selection being, in a large part anyway, something about life and death, which is what Darwin talked about, but the Bible also talks about it. The natural world today is full of suffering and life and death decisions that organisms have to make constantly. And so it's kind of like this idea of, things might morph slowly before the fall, but it goes in on steroids and goes into hyperdrive after the fall, because now we've got, bunny rabbits having to run away from a wolf and a hawk and things like that.
Well, so what we're seeing here is natural selection eliminating the unfit, but it doesn't actually create the fit. That's where Darwin goes wrong. He thinks natural selection creates the fit, but all it does is remove what's not fit.
One of his big failings, natural selection is a culling process. It takes what is there and it removes things. It never creates anything.
Yeah, well, the Darwinian process of evolution from goo to you via the zoo requires new genes, new information. But what we're seeing with natural selection is taking out what's already there.
And so, but evolutionists, of course, have figured this out. They say, oh, no, there's this thing called mutation. So the Neo-Darwinian synthesis, about 50 or more years after Darwin, they come together and say, okay, we have selection plus mutation. And the mutation is a engine of new features. But all of that was developed before we even knew what DNA was. All that was developed before we understood how complex life is. So yeah, you can have a mutation, you can have a new trait appear, but random changes don't lead to things like photosynthesis or vision or complex chemistry in the cell. You don't get super complex things from small random changes. Small random changes be more like rust on a car, not the inventions of a turbocharger or something like that. Incremental changes don't produce tremendous new features. And that's what you said. Evolution requires encyclopedias of brand new things to appear. And yet they have no means of that. There's no mechanism of that occurring.
I mean, it's interesting when you think of people like the late Christopher Hitchens, who was an atheist. Well, he's dead now. He knows there is a God. But he thought, well, blind creatures in caves, well, that disproves the creation model. It proves evolution. And Richard Dawkins endorsed that as a wonderful argument.
It's a terrible argument.
But hang on. It's a ridiculous one because you've lost something. I mean, we actually agree with both of those in saying that these blind creatures did come from sighted creatures. We agree with that.
And they lost the ability to see because you don't want eyes in a cave because eyes can get scraped and they get fungal infections, then you die.
So in fact, losing the eye is actually an advantage.
In a cave.
In a cave.
But that does not explain the origin of the eye. In fact, in Darwin's writes, he's trying to explain the origin of the eyeball. And he says, okay, now let's just start with a light-sensitive spot. And then he imagines the light-sensitive spot growing bigger and then forming a cup and then growing a lens. And now you have an eyeball. But what he said was, let's start with a miracle. Because the detection of light by biological molecules is one of the most improbable chemical reactions you can possibly imagine because the light destroys those molecules. And so he starts with this magic thing. Oh, and there's another miracle involved in it, not just the chemistry of it. It's the fact that the light spot is connected to a brain that can interpret what it's seeing.
And react to it.
That is super complicated. The formation of an eyeball after that is actually trivial. Now it does. It does have to go through some stages where, as it's bending, it can't make an image, and there's all these problems of these giant leaps of technology that would have to happen. But those are minor compared to the biochemistry of light detection. And so, Darwinism is actually couched in ignorance.
Well, see, Richard Dawkins had the metaphor of climbing Mount Improbable in very small steps, but in fact, Darwin actually started off on an extremely high ledge of Mount Improbable, and is only climbing up a few feet to the summit. But he actually started off very high up on Mount Improbable, so he's totally got that wrong.
But that's because Darwin was more careful than Dawkins. Darwin was very conscious of the weaknesses of his theory, and he wrote about them, and he knew about them, and he discussed them, and he didn't want to go too far out on a limb. Dawkins, 3 sheets to the wind, let's do the whole thing here. From the Big Bang till today, everything is just perfectly naturalistic, and well, it's not really true.
But it's also, when you go to these blind cave creatures, there are many ways of losing sight, very few ways of gaining sight. So it's not really surprising if you haven't got natural selection eliminating defects. Like in a cave, there's no selection pressure to maintain sight. So there are a lot of ways eyes can go wrong.
Yeah, tons. You can break any number of different genes and lose vision or lose an eyeball. But there's no way to manufacture an eyeball if you don't have one.
It's quite interesting that the discoveries of these blind cave fish, sometimes they can actually breed and bring you sighted cave fish again.
Yes.
Which means that the mutation must have happened quite recently, because otherwise you get the genes themselves going all damaged because there's no selection pressure to maintain a gene for something that isn't working.
Yeah, you would have, if this thing had, lost its eyeballs a million years ago, you wouldn't expect it to be able to breed with a sighted fish and produce sighted fish right away. Because once you lose your eyeballs from one mutation, one gene, all the other things involved with eyeballs are free to mutate. And multiple mutations that appear, not just a single mutation. But there's also some interesting new information about some of these cave fish. It might actually be epigenetic.
Mm-hmm.
That if they go into the cave, the babies that are born, the next generation, won't have eyeballs because there's no epigenetic stimulation of certain genetic pathways that lead to the production of eyeballs.
Oh, okay.
Weird stuff, man.
But again, not really helping the evolutionary things. So really, Christopher Hitchens and Dawkins really shot themselves in the foot with that.
Yeah, they did. So what are some other examples that we hear a lot about? Beetles losing wings. Darwin wrote about this. It was at Madeira Island, I think it was.
Mm-hmm.
The beetles don't have wings because if they have wings, they fly, wind blows them off the island, and they blow out to sea and die. So a mutation that prevents wingedness in beetles means the beetles stay on the ground and they can live. But that's not an upward progress sort of thing. That's a devolution sort of thing. Same as the flightless cormorant on the Galapagos. These birds have these decrepit wings with, they look terrible. These wings are like mutant little stubby things with a couple of stray feathers sticking off. But you don't want to be a flighted cormorant, because if you leave the Galapagos, you can't make it back to the mainland.
Yeah, about 600 miles away or something.
Yeah.
It'd be a bit hard to fly. And that might be the only example of a true vestigial organ that we talked about in another episode. That would be a real vestigial organ.
That would be a real vestigial
organ.
Organ.
Downhill.
That's right. In fact, the wing and the shriveled up little wings on the beetles and the shriveled up wings on the bird. Yeah, that's an excellent example of a vestigial organ. That's funny. If you're not aware of the vestigial organ argument, go back and look at our other video. I think you'll find that fascinating.
So I guess the main thing left then is about the phrase natural selection, and there are some who think that personifies nature. It means that nature is actually consciously selecting things, and people think that's not very good, but that is not really a strong argument, is it?
No, because it was never intended that nature is alive, nature has a brain, or nature is picking anything. It's simply the way we say it in English. We don't have a better way to say something that happens all by itself with no help from any outside forces. We call that natural. And sure, it might be hinting at, Mother Nature in some ancient Greek or Roman mythology idea, but how else do we say it in English?
Yeah, I mean, Darwin, and the co-discoverer Alfred Russel Wallace, and then later on Richard Dawkins, they all made it very clear they're not intending it to mean to personify nature. They were rather annoyed at people who misunderstood it that way. So there you have the
But have people
evolutionists.
misunderstood it that way? I mean, interestingly, we might look in vain for someone who's writing about nature being personified with this idea until very recent times. I don't think there's a deep history of it. I think what it is evolutionists saying, "Oh, you silly creationists, you mistake this," and they paint a false picture.
And some people have probably taken them to heart and actually reacted the wrong way instead of saying, "Well, yeah, we agree with natural selection's real."
Yeah, in the same way that skeptics can claim falsely that the Bible teaches that the Earth is flat, and therefore a very small, very tiny minority of Christians was like, "Well, I believe the Bible, the Earth must be flat." No, man. You fell for the trap. What they told you was not true. And yet, because you're a Christian, you believe the Bible, it must be, you have to follow it. No, don't do that. Same thing here with natural selection. No one has ever taught that nature is alive until maybe modern times with Gaia theory and people like that. But that's new stuff.
The Lovelock thing. And I mean, I know that as a chemist, I talk about chemical affinity, electron affinity. We're not saying that the atom actually is alive and has wonderful feelings towards an electron.
Yeah.
It's just a term that we use.
Yeah, hydrophobic and hydrophilic. Water is not afraid of anything. It doesn't love anything. Yeah, but we use those terms all the time in the English language and international languages also, because it just simplifies life. It makes it so easy to talk about something inanimate as if it was animate, because you don't have to spend paragraphs describing something. You just say it and you're done. It's the way it works, man. This is the way we communicate. And no one ever said nature is alive, therefore nature is doing the selecting. Not true.
It wasn't true with Darwin and Wallace. It wasn't true with Dawkins. It wasn't true with Gould, any of these people.
No.
It's not true when creationists say natural selection either.
No. At Creation Ministries International, you and me and David Catchpole's been talking about this for a long time. Don Batten, Gary Bates, all of our scientists, all of our speakers, Carl Wieland. We are perfectly comfortable with the idea of natural selection because it's not anti-biblical. It's not pagan. It is demonstrable. It's common sense, and it's part of God's created order. It's actually a great argument for creation and a bad argument for evolution. So if you're watching to the end of this video and if you like this sort of content, don't forget to subscribe to our channel. You see the link below, but also do us a great favor and share this with your friends, because you can help us get the word out.